Hello and most welcome to 1215 of the series, and we will today look at mental states and quantum interference. I found an interesting article here by some researchers, and the article is called Mental States Follow Quantum Mechanics During Perception and Cognition of Ambiguous Figures. And ambiguous figures, as you know previously, I think, is, for instance, the neck cube. Written by Elio Conte, Andrei, Yuri, Orlando Toradello, Antonio Federici, Leonardo Mendolicchio, et al. Abstract. Processes undergoing quantum mechanics exhibit quantum interference effects. In this case, quantum probability result to be different from classical probabilities because they contain an additional main point that in fact is called quantum interference term. We use ambiguous figures to analyze if during perception, cognition of human subjects, we have violation of the classical probability field and quantum interference. The experiments conducted on a group of 256 subjects evidence that we have such quantum effects. Therefore, mental states during perception cognition of ambiguous figures follow quantum mechanics. Introduction. Mental operations consist of a content plus the awareness of such content. Consciousness is a system which observes itself. It evaluates itself being aware at the same time of doing so. We may indicate awareness statement by A, B, C. That are self-referential or auto-referential, and content statements. Just give me a second here. Continue. Mental operations consists of a content plus the awareness of such content. Consciousness is a system which observes itself. It evaluates itself being aware at the same time of doing so. We may indicate awareness statements by A, B, C that are self-referential or auto-referential. and content statements of our experience by X, Y, Z is the most simple definition of a single autoreferential statement. For example, X equals the snow is white, and I am aware of this. Human experience unceasingly involves intrinsically mental and experiential functions such as knowing and feeling, involving images, thoughts, and beliefs. A continuous interface holds between mind consciousness and brain. Neuroscience and neuropsychology have reached high levels of understanding and knowledge in this field by the extended utilization of electrophysiological and of functional brain imaging technology, fMRI. First of all, this last technique has identified brain areas that are involved in a wide variety of brain functions, including learning and memory. These are valuable studies that provide knowledge of the functional role of different brain areas. However, neuroscience finds it hard to identify the crucial link existing between empirical studies that are currently described in psychological terms and the data that arise instead described in neurophysiological terms. It is assumed that the measurable properties of the brain through functional imaging technology should be in itself sufficient to achieve an adequate explanation of psychologically described phenomenology that occurs during neuropsychological experiment. Of course, this manner of investigation encounters the reservation of some investigators who suggest that intrinsically mental and experiential functions such as feeling and knowing cannot be described exclusively in terms of material structure. They require an adequate physics in order to be actually explained. To this purpose, they outline the important role that quantum mechanics could carry out. In particular, we outline here the effort of Stapp in several years, and more recently Schwartz, Stapp and Beauregard 2005, who repeatedly outlined the problem to consider quantum mechanics in neuroscience and neuropsychology. The prospects for a quantum neurobiology were also outlined already more than a past decade ago. Therefore, it becomes of fundamental and general interest for neuroscience and neuropsychology to ascertain by experiments if quantum mechanics has a role in brain dynamics. In the present paper, we present an important contribution concerning this basic problem. We demonstrate that mental states follow quantum mechanics during perception and cognition of ambiguous figures. Quantum theoretical approach. Previously, we have given a logical self-reference mathematical model of conscious experience that is due to A.G. Kromoff. Consciousness represents the hard problem for scientific, epistemological, and philosophical knowledge. Present physical theory does not define an apparatus to describe conscious system. However, we cannot exclude that future generalization of the present physical knowledge will be able to approach such basic problems. An indication arises from quantum mechanics. Quantum theory represents the most confirmed and celebrated theory of science. Started in 1927 by founding fathers as Bohr, Heisenberg, Schrödinger, and Pauli. It has revolutionized our understanding of the physical reality in both scientific and epistemological fields. It was introduced to describe the behavior of atomic systems, but subsequently its range of validity has turned out to be much wider, including in particular some macroscopic phenomena like superconductivity or superfluidity. There is a salient and crucial feature for this theory. The conceptual structure and the axiomatic foundations of quantum theory repeatedly suggested from its advent and in the further 80 years of its elaboration that it has a profound link with mental entities and their dynamics. From its advent, such theory was strongly debated, but often also criticized, just for its attitude to prospect a model of reality that results strongly linked to mental entities and their dynamics. The standard formulation of quantum mechanics seems to fix the necessity for admitting the unequivocal role of mental properties to represent properties of the physical objects. We retain that it represents an important feature of the theory instead of its limits. However, there is the problem to correctly interpreting the connection between quantum mechanics and mental properties in the sphere of reality. It must be clear that one cannot have in mind a quantum physical reduction of mental processes. Niels Bohr borrowed the principle of complementarity, which is at the basis of quantum mechanics, from psychology. He was profoundly influenced by reading Principles of Psychology by William James. Bohr himself, however, never had in mind quantum reductionism of mental entities. Starting with 1930, there was also an important correspondence between Wolfgang Pauli and Carl Gustav Jung that culminated in the formulation of a theory of mind-matter synchronization. Also in this case, these founding fathers, as Pauli and Jung, were very distant to consider quantum reductionism perspective. Orlov proposed a quantum logic to describe brain function, but also he did not look for reduction of mental processes to quantum physics. The correct way to frame the problem is not to attempt a quantum reduction of mental processes. The most profitable application of quantum mechanics in cognitive sciences and psychology can be obtained not by any attempt of quantum physical reduction, but giving experimental evidence that cognitive systems are very complex information systems, to which also some laws of quantum systems can be applied. Just a reaching of such objective would represent a very great advance in the domain of knowledge. In fact, starting with such experimental evidence, we could elaborate some future developments, knowing this time the principles to use. The formal criteria to follow in order to approach with higher rigor the framing of the nature of mental entities and their dynamics. We retain that in this perspective we obtain here a first contribution, since we give for the first time experimental confirmation that mental states at some stages of human perception and cognition can be described by the formalism of quantum mechanics. We retain that in this perspective we obtain here a first contribution since we give for the first time experimental confirmation that mental states at some stages of human perception and cognition can be described by the formalism of quantum mechanics. Thus, for the first time, also if not under a reductionism perspective, we have the chance to understand what are the principles and rules acting as counterpart of human mind. To fully agree with the present paper, the reader must take care the following crucial point. Quantum mechanics has its unique law of transformation of probability distribution. It is well known that the main feature of quantum probabilistic behavior is the well-known phenomenon of inference of probabilities. Such interference regime may be obtained only in quantum systems, e.g. in the celebrated two-slit experiment that has been confirmed at any level of experimental investigation. Quantum dynamics of human decision-making was also studied rather recently by Bosemeyer et al. The interference gives the experimental basis of the superposition principle, and this latter is the basis foundation of the physical and philosophical system of view that we call quantum mechanics. This is the essential peculiarity that we aim to investigate in the present paper. Recently, the problem of quantum probabilities was extended to the so-called calculus of contextual probabilities. The basic notion of this approach is the context. In quantum mechanics, it is a complex of experimental physical conditions. In the present paper, it will be a complex of mental conditions. The essential feature of this elaboration is that by it we may be able to ascertain the presence of quantum-like behavior also in systems that exhibit context quantum-like behavior as physical, cognitive, social systems. We will not enter into the detail of the method here for brevity. But all the features are given in the quoted literature. The essence of the method is based on the following step. Let A and B be two dichotomous questions which can be asked of people, with possible answers yes equals plus or not minus. In our case, we consider A and B two mental quantum-like observables of people S under investigation. We split the given ensemble S of humans into two sub-ensembles of U and V of equal numbers. To ensemble U, we pose the question A with probability in answering, giving respectively by P A equals plus and P equals minus. It's a strict schedule for interpreting answers and compare them to quantum interference. This is what usually plays a fundamental role in classical statistics and decision making. However, it is violated for statistical experiments with quantum systems. The two-slit interference experiment is the basic experiments violating the classical model. In physical literature, such a viewpoint on this experiment was presented in detail by Feynman. By itself, the appearance of interference fringes was not surprising for him. In principle, interaction with a screen with slits may produce any kind of distribution of points on the registration screen. Quantum probabilistic features appear if one considers three different experiments. A, only the first slit open in an equivalent manner. We consider here the case B plus 1. B, only the second slit is open. Or C, both slits are open. Here the random variable B determines the slit. We now choose any point at the registration screen. For classical particles, FTP should predict the probability P in parentheses A equals plus. But for the C experiments, both slits are open on the basis of probabilities PA equals plus slash B equals plus. So I jump a little bit here to get to the zest of it. The result of the present paper established that we have quantum-like interference during perception and cognition in humans of ambiguous figures, and also in the condition of semantic conflict. The presence of quantum-like interference indicates that quantum mechanics has a role in the dynamics of mental states. Cognitive systems are fundamentally quantum-like, and the quantum representation might serve as the basis for quantum decision by such cognitive systems. In detail, our perception cognitive experiment evidenced that cognitive systems can behave in the quantum-like way, producing non-zero coefficients of interference. The contexts corresponding to ambiguity figures used in this cognitive experiment produced the coefficients of interference that provided a numerical measure of the incompatibility of these contexts. In brief, the experiments outlined deviations of cognitive statistics from classical statistics demonstrated as in classical and quantum wave mechanics. As a consequence, a cognitive system represents a mental context underlying decision-making by a mental wave function, probabilistic amplitude, and in an interference with the surrounding exterior world. Thus, instead of operating with probabilities and analyzing probabilities of various alternatives, the brain works directly with mental wave functions, so-called probabilistic amplitudes. We conclude that at least some perceptive cognitive systems have such quantum-like abilities. The brain should result to emulate quantum dynamics, at least under some conditions. Such an emulation of quantum dynamics would allow for a free valid logic in human cognition. True, false, and the superposition of true and false. This could explain the peculiar human ability to hold contradictory notions in mind simultaneously, although usually there is a collapse to one state or the other. But this ability to see things from opposite views might have been valuable in the development of sociability, empathy, and even cognitive innovation, which seems to depend on seeing things in radically different ways as compared to social and cultural norms. So what we have here is, I think, very great likelihood, the understanding that the brain actually works with three states: true, false, and both true and false, or either true and false. I just found another article that was titled "Quantum Mechanics and Human Cognition, Strange Bedfellows." I think it would be much stranger if our quantum mechanical world was not governed by quantum mechanics. Instead, it would be governed by physics that turned up in the late 17th century. I will continue with an article of Dirk F. Meyer, and who is trying to extend this notion a little bit more. And it's called Quantum Modeling of the Mental State. The concept of a cyclic mental workspace. Taking into account the constituting elements of the human brain, such as neural networks, individual neurons, transmembrane ion fluxes, and energy-producing cellular metabolism, as well as other molecules that promote neural activity. There is a clear consensus that the present knowledge of the brain collectively is insufficient to explain higher mental processes such as self-consciousness, qualia, intuition, transpersonal experiences, as well as functionally binding between distant parts of the brain. We argue that supercausal mechanisms are required to optimally integrate the above-mentioned building blocks of brain function, also enabling the brain to amplify minimal perturbations for proper anticipation and action. We propose that such a supercausal structure may function as an interface between molecular transitions and the particular higher mental functions. As attractive bridging principles, the isoenergetic brain model and the physical mathematical hypothesis denote as quantum brain theories are treated. It is acknowledged that elementary quantum processes are likely to be essential for higher brain functions, as well as behavior and cognitive processing. Since our central nervous system forms an integral part of a dynamic universe as a non-local information processing modality. In addition, we conclude that quantum concepts may, at least, serve as a useful probability model and/or metaphor for human cognition. Yet, versatile brain function may require complementary information processing mechanisms at the classical and quantum levels, both enabling bottom-up and top-down information processing. Concerted action of isoenergetic and quantum physics-based cognitive mechanisms in the human brain requires a nested organization of fine-tuned neural microsites that enable decoherence-protected information transfer. For a rapid and causally effective flux of information, as well as a continuous updating of meaningful information, a supercausal field model is required. This neural structure is conceived by us as a bicyclic mental workspace, housing, interacting, and entangled wave particles modalities that are integral parts of an atemporal universal knowledge domain. Introduction. The mind-brain issue has a long history of discussion with a strong multidisciplinary character. First of all, theology and philosophy. I should move here. First of all, theology and philosophy have a long tradition in these discussions, but more recently, physics, mathematics, biology, and medicine have largely contributed to this item. Philosophers and neurobiologists have often regarded their disciplines and approaches to be mutually exclusive. The long history of mind-matter discussion at least highlights two aspects. Firstly, the fascination about the quest of the origin of the mind. How closely and in what manner is it associated with the physical world? Secondly, as yet there seems to be no convincing answer whether the mind is an independent mental modality of the universe, in spite of the fact that the experience of a self-consciousness, flow of thoughts, and inner projections of our future are phenomena that we feel as a reality. It is clear that the brain does not simply process inputs and merge them at a higher levels, but at the same time also does the opposite. It predicts what comes next. This is how it can recognize events, situations, and people, and understand what is going on. Memory, therefore, is bidirectional. Memory interprets the present while it is absorbing it and anticipates future events. Memory, therefore, becomes also a reservoir for possible solutions to problems. Several frameworks have been proposed to reconcile the mental and the physical states. Most of these attempts start with a relatively monodisciplinary assumptions to tackle the mind-brain or mind-body problem. This essay analyzes some general concepts of brain functioning based on recent neurobiological investigations and discusses these with those originating primarily in quantum mechanical approaches. More precisely, we stress the importance of both quantum and classical molecular states for higher cerebral and, by implication, mental processes. Firstly, various mind-brain concepts are discussed, including emergent materialism, That is the idea that the interaction of the constituting components of the brain creates emergent and largely unpredictable properties that ultimately produce our experience of mind. We examine the relationship between brain energy metabolism and general brain functions, and argue that they are, by and large, unrelated. We propose that brain metabolism serves to maintain a high energy state, that is potential energy, and isoenergicity to ensure future activities. High energy molecular perturbations are supposed to be easily amplified to become meaningful signals for the organism. Together with the stored information acquired during life, a personal universe is created. Secondly, some recent physical mathematical theories of mind are examined, denoted here as quantum mechanical theories, because they are largely based on quantum physics. The attractiveness of a quantum theory has been justified by its basic elements of, first, uncertainty. That means that mental phenomena are not governed by classical physical laws of determinism and causation, so that there is room for intuition and free will. Second, a universal consciousness with the individual consciousness as participating agents. Third, consciousness, even seen as a non-physical entity, finally acts in the physical domain and may exert causal power. Fourth, explaining mental transition from apparently non-conscious thoughts and processes to conscious ones, and vice versa. Fifth, a potential difference between internal time perception and external physical time. Sixth, the possible non-temporality of the so-called past, present, and future, that would enable backward causation in which future events may affect present or perhaps past processes. The particular quantum mechanisms are treated on the basis of two alternative stances. The first takes quantum theories as a metaphor for probability-based brain processing. That is, quantum theory-inspired mathematical models are used to describe cognitive processes such as decision-making. The other stance takes quantum mechanics more literally. Here the mind is seen as a quantum mechanical defined property of most if not all. Matter/energy assumes extra space-time dimensions to describe and understand mental aspects of reality. This is a view taken, among others, by Atman Spasher. Finally, an attempt is made to integrate the two supercausal concepts, postulating a cyclic operating workspace, housing complementary but interacting supercausal mechanisms in the form of classical neurobiological and quantum mechanical defined information flow. The scientific feasibility and testability of this model, as well as its respective implications for understanding mind-matter relations, are then discussed. Two, philosophical premises in matter/mind considerations. The section summarizes and discusses some prominent philosophical stances on the mind-brain relationship. This choice is not exhaustive but serves to introduce preferably concepts. Substance dualism attributes mind and brain to belong to non-overlapping domains of the universe. The presumed advantage of dualism is that mind has many degrees of freedom because it is neither directly limited by physical systems nor associated with deterministic laws. Others have proposed that the mind is a non-physical entity that either emerges from the brain or has to be considered as an epiphenomenon. Neither of the above concepts accommodates the power of the mind as an agent capable to affect the physical brain. According to eliminative materialism, a concept such as mind cannot be described by the natural sciences, and consequently should be seen as a construction of folk psychology. All four theories, that is dual aspect monism, eliminative materialism, emergence epiphenomenon, supervenience, fail to acknowledge the importance of mind in the evolution and the functioning and survival of organisms. One monistic answer to the aforementioned brain-mind theories is a materialistic framework that assumes that the mind, that is the subjective qualitative consciousness mind, is fully identical to objective phenomena such as neurobiological behavior or functional brain states. Jae-Won Kim is the major proponent of the supervenience theory, stating that what happens in our mental life is wholly dependent on and determined by what happens with our bodily processes. In other words, the mind must be equated to a brain state, and in order to go to another state of the mind, the brain has to change its physical state. Yet a tacit and implicit assumption of supervenience is that the emerging mind is irreducible to any or to all the underlying neurobiological components or processes. This seems to contrast systems biology theory, stating that emerging new properties arise as a consequence of the interaction of its constituting components. In neurobiological terms, neither of the latter theories has to explain or reduce the mind as a property of a collection of any of the constituents of the brain, things like proteins, genes, cells, aggregates of cells, or neural networks. Yet the mind can also be viewed upon as an emerging property that cannot be understood by or reduced to the properties of the underlying brain constituents. In John Searle's terms, there exist emerging properties of the brain that both have physical and mental aspects. Closely related to Searle's conceptualization is the idea of a creative evolution as advanced by Kaufman and Vata et al. Both evolution of species and individual ontology have a common principle. Relatively simple entities evolve to more complicated organisms. However, the Darwinian type of evolution does not solely lead to biological structures with higher complexities, but also to entirely new structures that cannot be predicted or deduced from the properties of precursor components. The properties of the constituting elements somehow enable an integrated and interacting network that is largely unpredictable from the properties of these precursor elements. In other words, a cell is more than a collection of molecules, such as proteins, lipids, and nucleic acids. Rather, it is a well-organized entity that, for instance, entertains a correct replication process and gains survival based on adequate adaptive responses to environmental challenges. From a classical ontological point of view, the higher complexity is supposed to be an emergent, bottom-up property of the lower levels, but cannot be fully predicated from these lower level properties. In this sense, it is a creative, hence non-ergodic transition. The principle of emergent materialism is close to Atmansbacher's concept of contextual emergence. Yet the supposed emergent properties often seem to take the form of explanations in retrospect and exhibit limited explanatory power. Alternatively, the underlying functional levels may possess an intrinsic dynamic character. Being to some extent subject to top-down causation, or in quantum mechanical terms, influenced by backward causation. In short, it is proposed that the brain should be regarded as a personal universe, formed during life through permanent actual realizations of dynamic brain states that are the product of sensory as well as stored information that contains memorized and anticipatory elements. A central question is, what does the mind do that the brain does not? The classical model depicts the brain as a complex network system of components, including atoms, molecules, cellular energy, protein perturbations, transmembrane ion fluxes, synaptic transmission, and electric signaling through nerve action potentials. By internal interaction of these constituting elements, and also through recurrent interaction with external information, it is supposed to produce a versatile workspace, the mind. However, in spite of such an integrated functional network concept, in our opinion, some higher mental brain functions cannot be simply explained or predicated from the properties of these building blocks. That is, without integrating additional bridging theories. Brain metabolism and mental function. The human brain is an extremely complex organ that is able to adequately react to environmental challenges by fast information processing. In our paper, this remarkable speed of information processing will be put into the context of some known psychophysiological data that are presently available. In this respect, we take into account aspects of brain energy, metabolism, and blood circulation as measured by functional MRI, in addition to some other aspects of basic neurophysiology. The human brain consumes approximately 25% of the energy of the whole body at physical rest, and approximately 70% of the brain energy supports and maintains neurotransmission processes and the generation of nerve action potentials. Neuroimaging, including functional MRI, are generally thought to reflect brain function. It appeared, however, that brain functions are essentially disconnected from brain metabolism. The following examples illustrate this idea. First, A. Even subliminal simulations of less than 50 milliseconds might inform the perceiver. B. Linguistic studies illustrate the extreme speed of cognition. Meaningful as opposed to nonsense words can already be distinguished within 50 milliseconds. C. The time lag of unconscious to conscious experience ranges from 0.3 to 0.5 seconds. These observations collectively show that complicated culture-specific information is recognized in our brain prior to reaching consciousness, and also show that information processing by the brain is much faster than metabolism. Therefore, a prime role for very fast changes of protein conformation seems more likely. In neurophysiological terms, information can be retrieved from the environment and or from memory by less than 6 consecutive action potentials or synaptic transmissions. It's getting progressively hot here, and the paper is getting progressively interesting. Secondly, the underlying assumption of fMRI is that psychological mental tasks require an adequate supply of energy. Indeed, after a short sensory simulation, the regional cerebral blood flow increases after a delay of 0.5 to 2 seconds and peaks over 4 to 6 seconds. before returning to baseline metabolism. This time course is far slower than the neural firing seen within 50 milliseconds. For example, after light flashes, similar or even faster electrophysiological response was reported during auditory stimuli. Spotting the origin of noise with both ears is performed subconsciously within 0.05 milliseconds. This is substantially faster than the time range of most neurotransmissions events or action potentials, about 2 milliseconds. Such a fast discrimination may only be achieved by converging the particular information almost instantaneously, for instance by rapid conformational perturbations in brain proteins. These and many other experiments support the idea that brain metabolism represents a delayed response to the neural activity. A weak coupling is also apparent at the cellular level. The generation of an action potential starts by change of protein conformation, for example, leading in the opening of sodium and potassium channels and terminated by their closing. The aforementioned experiments show that brain energy metabolism is primarily restorative rather than being required for starting and performing activity. A similar reasoning applies to other metabolic processes. For instance, gene transcription, protein synthesis, or neurotransmitter formation and degradation do not directly cause functional brain activity. We conclude, therefore, that the biochemical conversions do provide the conditions enabling fast processing and storing of information, but are not directly A similar reasoning applies to other metabolic processes. For instance, gene transcription, protein synthesis, or neurotransmitter formation and degradation do not directly cause functional brain activity. We conclude, therefore, that biochemical conversions do provide the conditions enabling fast processing and storing of information, but are not directly instrumental in the neurotransmission processes per se. Often the mental state is seen as a short lasting event. Fast transitions from one state to another occur with little or no connection or interference with preceding states. This time frame might indeed apply to visual images or during epileptic insults, but does not necessarily apply to a normal, uninterrupted state of consciousness. Apparently, the mental state is to some extent time independent and personal. Within this context, while transitions of cognition, mood, and other mental features may occur, the neurophysiological processes may therefore be better positioned in a more general time frame. For the timing of behavior, 6 sequential and functional hierarchical timescales were distinguished. 1 for sensory processing, or 1 to 200 milliseconds, the same range as sublingual recognition, memory and speaking. 2, preparing movement trajectories, 0.01 to 1.5 seconds. 3, contextual influence on action prediction, 10 seconds or longer. 4, ordering cognitive control systems, 10 seconds and much longer. Five, representation of temporally most stable environmental states. 6, the latter can be extended to longer periods, ranging from minutes to years and even to lifetime. Specific brain regions are supposed to be associated with each of the first 5 time frames, according to the hierarchic rostrocordial gradient of the brain, ranging from the sensory and associative cortex to the orbitofrontal cortex. Such an hierarchical time frame may also be conceptualized as the time required to create a personal brain. We emphasize here also that processes at the highest level of brain complexity have a direct hierarchical influence on the lower level processes. In other words, each lower level hierarchy might be considered as a sub-time space or part of a higher level hierarchy. Consequently, the lower level configurations may eventually emerge into an individual time-space configuration, or in the concluding words of the previous section, to a personal universe. The foregoing section illustrates the weak relationship between cerebral metabolism and electrophysiological brain functioning, and stresses the potential key role of various proteins in the initiation and execution of neural and mental activity. During life, our organism seems to build up a personal brain, an inner personal universe. Most mental capabilities learned during development and life become manifest by subconscious processing of information in a time frame that is in the sub-millisecond range and hence extremely fast as compared to classical neuronal communication and synaptic transmission. This as yet non-comprehensible activity is maintained after a variety of normal, non-conscious brain states, sleep, etc., and even after brain trauma, except perhaps the most severe experiences. In some prominent quantum brain models, it is proposed that clusters of structured water can undergo gel-sol conformational shifts supporting tubular and/or channel proteins to display vibratory features that enable coherent signal transduction. The main issue of the present essay is to evaluate the potential of wave information to exert such relatively rapid brain reactions, and also if they are somehow coupled to manifest mental processes, including time symmetric forward and backward causation. In the next sections, the various quantum mechanical theories of mind are shortly discussed. It is important to note that the neurobiological and the quantum mechanical concepts are not necessarily mutually exclusive and even may function in a complementary fashion. One could envision also that the inner or personal universe, as proposed by us, is mirrored in the outer universe, and vice versa, and that in evolution both aspects were essential for the creation of first life, along with mutation and selection. Nature in this manner fully employed its basic physical instruments to produce beings that would be able to understand the world both by observation and introspection. The classical neurological interpretation of the brain can therefore be seen as a bottom-up, atomic, molecular to neural networks flow of information, whereas quantum approaches are based on entangled states, implying a non-local, unbroken reality. In both cases, a multi-layered organization of brain is at stake, although direction of the flow of information can occur in top-down and bottom-up directions. Alternatively, personal mind can be envisioned as a non-local expression of a cosmic universal mind. Through interfacing individual and universal consciousness, consequently including a top-down aspect. For quantum physics and psychology, psychological observations and recent experiments have led to non-deterministic models of brain function based on quantum mechanics and chaos theory. Freeman is one of those proposers. Atmanspacher makes a distinction between descriptive and explanatory models in mind/matter considerations, in which the term correlation is a relevant descriptive term, while causation is seen as an explanatory term related to theoretically understanding correlations between cause and effect. With regard to quantum models, a distinction is made between quantum mechanical models, in which intentional conscious acts are correlated with physical state reductions, including quantum field models, in which mental states are treated as vacuum states of quantum fields, as opposed to quantum mechanical metaphoric models. With regard to the latter, Niels Bohr has already suggested that mutually excluding images have aided the formulation of the complementary hypothesis of quantum mechanics. Many authors have recognized the potential of using quantum probability approach in the psychology of cognition and decision-making rather than more classical approaches. Quantum mechanics and its formalisms should be viewed upon here as metaphors, in that particular features of the quantum theoretical formalism are realized in a non-physical context. In this section, we present examples of this stance. Recent research has been focused on modeling of decision-making. In experimental settings, subjects were asked to make easy choices with game cards between a few alternatives. These alternatives were best described with stochastic models rather than as deterministic processes. Other research did focus on the idea of geometric subspaces. Where the probability of choices became order and context dependent. This means that decisions are made not only by taking into account the grounds as independently contributing factors, but also by their order of exposure to the subject. Again, this has been related to the real quantum theory, where a wave function in a superposition and without distinct spatial location becomes a well-localized particle after interference with the physical body, including an observer. The authors of the latter studies emphasize the quantum nature of their models because they use terms such as superposition, entanglement, and collapse as they are used in quantum physics to denote an undetermined state, that is, a wave function that after collapse behaves as a particle. Entanglement is used in quantum mechanics to denote that, for instance, spin properties of a particle are correlated with a related particle, in the sense that the orientation of the spin of one particle becomes determined after the collapse through observation of the related particle. Related to these quantum mechanical ideas are rapidly alternating brain and mind states, as for example illustrated with classical ambiguity pictures, picturing the brain in a state of superposition. A quantum approach was also used to model B-stable perceptions. Figures such as the Necker cube can be interpreted as either of the particular spatial configurations. The switch between these interpretations are assumed to be short as compared to observation time, the so-called Zeno effect. And moreover, the two interpretations are mutually exclusive. The interwoven objects cannot simultaneously conceptualize. During a short period of time, only one configuration is recognized, and alternating views are more or less subject to the will of the observer. Despite such persuading theorizing, Busemeyer and Brusa laid to heart the lesson that in the psychological experiment, a superposition is merely a word that can be interpreted as representing a number of different senses, while an entangled cognitive state is highly biased towards one subset of interpretive senses. Finally, collapse is merely the process by which a subject decides upon a particular interpretation in the context of a set of cues and stimuli. The question remains how and when subconscious thoughts or arguments become manifest prior to the very moment that the subject definitely chooses or decides. The related time course of the cerebral electrophysiological activity was described during the initiation and execution of voluntary behavior by the classical experiments of Libet and later by others. This approach might be regarded as a decision-making experiment, and the readiness potential can be seen as to reflect the superposition state of the brain. Following regional brain activity using fMRI technology show that the preparation phase in the anterior frontopolar cortex might precede the decision as much as 6 seconds. Oh my God. Once in a superposition state, decisions in laboratory context are made in a very short period of time as compared to the preparation time. So there is a lot of preparation, so-called priming, but the actual execution is short. I would say Newtonian is not preparing, and this is what the absolute majority of people do. They act on the double in the very instant. Quantum mechanics shows preparation is everything. Actually, without preparation there is no free will, whether that be quantum mechanical or classical mechanical. The free will is a preparation, and it takes time, rather a lot of time compared. Spivey and co-workers have emphasized the continuity of mind rather than sequential states, as opposed to the quantum approach. They illustrate their ideas with decision-making experiments, showing that the subject in an apparently indecisive state stay longer indecisive when the decisions are more ambivalent, once the choice has been made. The decision is realized faster. These studies show that decisions are anticipated far before the overt behavior, which is very important. In the classical model, we don't know anything until it happens. In the quantum, we know long before it happens, and therefore we have a sort of spacing time to prepare, to prime. That is not an option in classical physics. We cannot anticipate things. I would say in quantum mechanics, all we do is anticipate. These laboratory experiments are compatible with the idea that the central nervous system, the subject, develops a kind of superposition state before making the choice, the collapse. For the subject, the significance of artificial problem solving is evidently modest and requires little mind space. More important decisions might require a larger space of the personal universe and more processing time. Trueblood and Busemeyer summarize 4 reasons for considering a quantum approach to human judgment. 1. Human judgment is not a simple readout from pre-existing or recorded state. It is rather the process of imposing measurements that forces the resolution of the indeterminacy. 2. Before measurement, cognition behaves more like a wave than a particle, allowing the individual to feel a sense of ambiguity about different belief states simultaneously, as if beliefs remain in a superimposed state until a final decision must be reached. I almost have to repeat that because it's so good. Human judgment is not a simple readout from pre-existing or recorded state. It is rather the process of imposing measurements that forces the resolution of the indeterminacy. 2. Before measurement, cognition behaves more like a wave than a particle, allowing the individual to feel a sense of ambiguity about different belief states simultaneously, as if beliefs remain in a superimposed state until a final decision must be reached. Three, changes in the context produced by one judgment can affect later judgments. Quantum probability theory captures this phenomenon through the notion of incompatibility about another. 4. Cognitive logic does not necessarily obey the rules of classical logic, such as the commutative and distributive axioms. Quantum logic is more generalized than classical logic and can model human judgments that do not obey Boolean logic. How does the above described quantum concepts relate to time perception and to the idea of mind? An organism develops and ages both by genetic programming and by external influences. As discussed, the brain becomes molded by personal experiences because of the continuous accumulation of information. There is a perception of a past to future time arrow in the mental domain. On the other hand, one does not consult more recent memories before reaching memories of more distant past. Indeed, the major principle of memorizing is a temporal association, not unlike searching information with a few keywords in a computer network. Hence, our mind might perceive backward causation, that is, the effect of expected situations on current activity. Classically, time perception might be divided into two apparently different aspects, referring to an external process, like a clock, or to internal processes, experience, memories. Primas distinguishes tenseless, causal, and tense time, respectively. I just need to check if I have. So what Meyer here shows in the paper together with his colleagues is that we need to infer the three possibilities of reality, and that is yes, no, and both yes and no. And both yes and no, of course, is the probability wave. It is the potence and potentiality of anything to be. Everything starts there. Clearly shown by quantum mechanics, doubtlessly. That is the foundational nature of reality. And also as proven by John Bell, we do actually know that the foundation of reality is undetermined. Potentiality underlies reality. And since we know this as a fact, I would say it's saner to adjust our theories to that fact. So to speak, at least from a scientific perspective, we know Sein, to use a Heideggerian term. We know Sein to some of its characteristics, its properties, and one of the properties that we do know, could be the only one that we do know, but we know that it is intrinsically undetermined, not determined. I would say most philosophical theories, except for Derrida and Heidegger, they all assume that the world has a definite property. Either they do it explicitly, but mostly, in 99% of the cases, they do it indirectly, unconsciously. The forgetfulness of Martin Heidegger, amnesia, is literally a forgetfulness. No one is aware that we assume the world to be predetermined. And here is exactly where the problem starts. And it led up to the collapse in 1874 by M&M, when it was proven that light has a definite speed. It cannot be changed. So until that collapsed, everyone indirectly assumed the world to be defined in some way. And nota bene, Einstein lingered on with that, as did the rest of society. So it is a different world model, but even if it's not shared by many or very few, it is still the proven world model, whereas no other model is proven up to this time. I say thank you very much and have a very pleasant afternoon. Thank you very much.